Okay. I'm Shailen Parasnis, and this is my March Madness historical bracket eval. So why March Madness? So for me, I think it's pretty cool to see that there's a 1 in 9.2 quintillion chance at a perfect bracket. And it's so interesting to see how many people fill out multiple brackets a year and how this never gets done. For data collection, I use Sports Reference as my data bank, and for analysis and graphs, I use Excel models to help me analyze trends. And then I had to think about what story and connection I wanted to build from my data as well as my conclusion. So here's some key terms to think about for this presentation. Although this is an analytics project, I want to keep in mind the idea of March Madness, and that a big motto is surviving and advancing. A lot of upset alerts, a lot of Cinderella teams is what makes it so special and kind of hard to predict. So this led me to my research question: what are the advanced stats that can be used to predict the teams in the Final Four? So the data that I included was all Division I teams. I had to think about offensive versus defensive teams. Given the time frame for this project, I've mostly focused on offensive advanced stats, and then as well as I looked at outliers such as like the 2023 Final Four teams, because I think that was a big shock to everyone to see who made it, and then as well keeping in mind the idea of March Madness. So here's an example of my data on an Excel sheet, which I took from Sports Reference. A lot of this data has a bunch of teams that didn't even make the tournament: wins, losses, strength of schedule, away, conference, and a lot of information that I didn't think was that necessary. So I had to move and kind of organize this data, filtered for teams using this filtered for teams that were actually within the tournament, looked at different advanced stats: offensive rating, free throw rate, true shooting percentages. I color coded each of the boxes as well in order to see, I could see visually easier, for the teams that had darker green were obviously outperforming the field average. One note is for the turnover percentage. It is flipped where the red is actually going to be the best teams, because obviously you want a lower turnover percentage. And I use formulas to produce graphs based on the data trends. So for the advanced stats analysis, how often were Final Four teams ranked elite in each stat? So elite means can be defined as teams that ranked above the 65th percentile compared to the field. So you can see offensive rebounding percentage and offensive rating were year in, year out big constant pillars for these teams that were making the Final Four, as well as the 4 other stats that kind of help support that. The gap is growing between Final Four teams as they're pulling away from the field. As you can see, the offensive rating is drastically above the field average, and you can see that from 2021 to 2026. And the elite teams outperform in every dimension. So in this fingerprint graph and radar graph, you can see that the white dashed circle is the field average and the average, and the blue circle is the Final Four teams. And again, offensive rating and total rebounding percentages were the ones that were outperforming the field. Again, another thing is consistency across various stats, not just one stat wonders. So thinking about how offensive ratings, rebounding, the 50%, 50% would be the field average. So one thing to think about also is strength of schedule. A lot of these teams come from Power 5 conferences, so they're playing against each other. And something to think about, because a lot of the teams like Miami, who had a great season this year, obviously they didn't do well in the tournament. So it's something to think about. A lot of these teams, if they're not playing hard enough competition, are their stats actually as good as they seem? Next is dominating the offensive glass. I didn't think about this much when I was doing my research. However, it came up a lot, and I saw again outperforming the average percentile. And what I concluded is that a lot of this comes from second point chances as well. So for these teams that are high in offensive rebounding, the teams with massive firepower on the offensive side are able to capitalize on those second chance opportunities. Some takeaways are, again, scoring efficiency for these teams that you see year in, year out. Offensive rebounding, again, controlling the game, being able to capitalize on those opportunities. I didn't have a graph for turnover discipline, but that was another thing in my data analysis, was looking at a lot of the teams had a front court that was able to handle pressure and keep the turnover rate relatively low, under 20% for the threshold. And again, one thing that was shocking was pace is kind of irrelevant. For the Final Four teams, they were ranked about in the 46th percentile, and that's something that I think was shocking, because at the end of the day, a lot of people talk about moving the ball up the court, playing with fast pace, and teams, you can see that teams like Duke that play fast pace, as well as Houston that has a slower pace, there really isn't a correlation between teams that have pace. It's more focused on the other offensive stats. And some next steps that I would do if I had some more time, go a little bit deeper into some of the outliers, look at hot teams going into conference tournaments like 2024 NC State. I think they're exemplified the idea of a team that didn't even have a bid going into the March Madness tournament until they actually won the ACC tournament. Also, a deeper case study on 2023 Final Four and just the playoffs in general. I think those 4 teams being the Final Four teams were obviously, again, interesting. And following a team throughout the season, this is something I want to do next season, is look at what players would come hot during the tournament and which ones might fade, as well as looking at the Sweet 16 second chance bracket and seeing data from the first and second rounds and seeing if that can help me predict for the Final Four as well. Thank you.